No American politician in recent history has embraced more service members on camera than Donald Trump. He has offered salutes to innumerable generals, visited numerous military bases, and delivered countless speeches commending our extraordinary heroes and the most magnificent military force ever assembled. He has stood beside Medal of Honor recipients for photographs. He has placed ceremonial wreaths at various sacred memorials. He has shared the phrase, "Thank you for your service," on social media more times than anyone could reasonably count. Yet until that particular October evening on Fox News, nobody had ever asked the most straightforward question: if your devotion to veterans is so deep, why do you persistently attempt to defraud them? Before the broadcast concluded, 6 former service members had departed the studio in protest. A Gold Star mother had demanded responses that he was unable to supply. Consequently, a single sentence was resonating across every television screen, smartphone, and far-flung corner of the internet. "I was the sucker, Mr. President, for trusting a single word you uttered." The documentation she arrived with had been public record for many years. Legal filings and foundation logs had been uncovered by journalists and validated by members of the judiciary. However, nobody had ever read those papers directly to Trump's face while military personnel were seated in the crowd. Nobody had ever compelled him to observe their eyes as they absorbed the actual facts. That changed when Jasmine Crockett stepped onto that stage carrying 2 distinct binders. She ultimately required only one of them. The entire arrangement had seemed flawless. At least that was the conviction held by Trump's advisory team when Fox News announced the exclusive primetime special dedicated to honoring our heroes. Billed as a discussion regarding veteran affairs, the campaign celebrated. It was perceived as friendly territory, an agreeable topic, and an audience pre-selected for patriotic sentiment and filled with military households. "This is an absolute gift," campaign manager Chris Lasvita mentioned to the staff. "It's 2 hours of him embracing veterans and discussing his immense affection for the troops. It is essentially free publicity." The sole complexity was the segment designated for an opposing perspective. Fox management desired some equilibrium. They had extended an invitation to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for 15 minutes of counter-arguments. Trump was not concerned in the slightest. "The public defender," he chuckled when informed, straightening his tie in the green room mirror 40 minutes prior to the broadcast. "What could she possibly understand about the armed forces? She defends felons, whereas I defend heroes." Eric Trump nodded with intense enthusiasm. "She has never served a day. What could she possibly contribute?" "Precisely," Trump said, smoothing his suit jacket while appreciating his own reflection. "Those are my supporters out there, veterans and military families. They absolutely adore me, and this is going to be tremendous." He failed to notice the production assistant in the corner sending a text message to a companion. "Something feels different this evening." Crockett's staff arrived with display gear, easels, and dense binders. Nobody brings that much material for a mere 15-minute slot. 4 levels beneath them, located in a more compact green room, Jasmine Crockett was organizing her documents with the exactitude of a surgeon laying out tools. 2 folders were the extent of it, one colored blue and the other red. Her chief of staff, Marcus Chen, observed with evident anxiety. "You realize he intends to attack you personally, using the low intelligence rhetoric and the racial signaling he invariably employs with black women." "I am aware," she replied. "And you are acceptable with that prospect?" Crockett raised her gaze. There was a quality in her eyes that caused Marcus to take an unintentional step in retreat. It was not rage, but rather something much more frigid. It was the expression of a chess grandmaster who has visualized the checkmate 10 turns ahead of their adversary. "Marcus, I dedicated 6 years to being a public defender within Dallas County. I have experienced judges yelling directly into my face. I have had prosecutors attempt to shatter my resolve with words that would cause these television personalities to flush with embarrassment. I have had clients, genuine homicide offenders, threaten my existence because they disliked my professional counsel." She shut the red binder with a gentle snapping sound. "Donald Trump insulting me on national television is not going to destroy my afternoon. But what I possess within these binders," she tapped the blue one, "this might very well destroy his." Marcus gulped nervously. You only brought 2 folders? If I require more than 2 binders for an audience filled with veterans, I have already lost the argument, she said. Their past service accomplishes the work. Their countenances accomplish the work. I merely need to present them with the truth and move out of the path. At exactly 8:58 p.m. Eastern Time, both participants assumed their designated positions. The Fox News studio shined beneath lights intense enough to cause anyone to perspire, although only one of them would be sweating by the conclusion of the night. The audience composition was distinct from a standard town hall meeting. 150 veterans occupied the forward sections, many clad in uniform jackets or donning caps from their respective service organizations, such as the VFW, American Legion, and Marine Corps. League. Behind them were seated another 100 members of military families, including wives, husbands, parents, and children of those who had served. Trump examined the room like a monarch inspecting his subjects. These were his people, the individuals who cheered the loudest at his rallies, the ones who trusted him when he asserted he would never disappoint them. Brett Baier stood at the central stage, notes ready in his hand. He had been informed this was a straightforward event. Veteran issues, policy discussion, perhaps some emotional beats, but nothing controversial. He had absolutely no conception of what was coming. 30 seconds out, a producer called. Trump rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and smiled for the cameras. Crockett stood perfectly immobile at her podium, hands clasped over her 2 binders, her expression pleasant and entirely inscrutable. The red tally lights blinked into existence. Brett Baier had barely finished his introduction before Trump seized control of the narrative. Let me just state something before we commence. He spread his arms broadly, encompassing the audience like a tent revival preacher welcoming his flock. Look at this room. Look at these incredible people. These are heroes, every single one of them, and I am so honored to be here tonight. Applause rippled throughout the audience. It was genuine applause. These were individuals who desired to believe. Nobody has done more for veterans than me. Nobody. We rebuilt the VA. We got the VA Accountability Act passed. We got choice so veterans could see private doctors if the VA lines were too long. He checked off the accomplishments on his fingers. We gave them the respect they deserve finally after years of neglect under Obama and Biden, he said, drawing more applause. Trump was in his element now, feeding off the energy in the room. I've probably done more for veterans than any president since Lincoln, maybe more than Lincoln because I didn't have a war to deal with. He paused, then gestured toward Crockett with casual dismissiveness. And they invited her for balance. Very nice, very fair and balanced. He smirked at his own witticism. But what does she know about the military? She's never served. She's a public defender from Texas. She defends criminals, murderers, real rapists. I defend heroes. There was some laughter from the audience, nervous but present. With all due respect, Trump continued, his voice dripping with the opposite of respect, this is a conversation for people who actually support our troops, not for DEI politicians looking for camera time. He settled back, satisfied with his performance. The crowd was with him. The setup was perfect. Crockett waited. She let the applause die down and let the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then she spoke. You are correct, Mr. President. I have never served in uniform, I have never been deployed, and I have never experienced combat. She paused briefly. But I have also never called a veteran a loser, so perhaps we have different definitions of supporting the troops. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Something in the air changed palpably. Trump's smirk flickered. That's a lie. I never said that. Fake news. We will get to that, Crockett said calmly. But first, let's talk about your service record. I had bone spurs. It was a medical condition documented by doctors. 5 deferments, Crockett said, pulling a document from her blue folder. 4 for college and 1 for bone spurs. The podiatrist who diagnosed those bone spurs had an office in a building owned by your father. His daughters later admitted on the record that the diagnosis was a favor to Fred Trump. She set down the document firmly. But that's ancient history. You were young. Lots of people avoided the draft. Let's talk about what you've done since, what you've done for veterans in the years since you decided to become their champion. Trump relaxed slightly. This felt like better ground. Absolutely. Let's talk about that because no one has. Let's start with a single event, Crockett said, picking up the blue folder again. One fundraiser, January 28th, 2016 in Iowa. She opened the folder. This is where it gets interesting. The screen behind Crockett lit up with an image, Trump at a podium with a giant novelty check displayed behind him. The number $6 million was printed in bold letters. Do you remember this night, Mr. President? Trump nodded wearily. The Veterans Fundraiser, we raised $6 million for veteran organizations. It was incredible, one of the best nights of my campaign. It was the night you skipped a Republican primary debate because you were feuding with Megyn Kelly. You held a competing event instead, billed as a fundraiser for veterans. She pulled up video footage, Trump at the podium, American flags everywhere, the crowd cheering. We raised $6 million, and I'm giving $1 million of my own money. This money is going to great veteran organizations, the best. They do incredible work. The clip ended. $6 million, Crockett repeated, including $1 million from your own pocket. That's what you told America. That's what you told the veterans who were watching. She gestured at the audience. Some of you were probably watching that night. Some of you may have donated. Some of you may have told your friends. Finally, a politician who actually supports us. Several veterans nodded. They remembered. So let me show you what actually happened to that money. She pulled up a timeline with dates and headlines, stark against a white background. January 28, 2016, fundraiser held, $6 million announced. February 2016, veteran organizations begin asking when they'll receive funds, no response. March 2016, still nothing distributed, veteran groups confused. April 2016, Washington Post journalist David Farenthold starts investigating. He calls dozens of veteran organizations, then hundreds, and most have received nothing. Many have never heard of the fundraiser. May 2016, Farenthold publishes investigation, headline, 4 months later, where's the money Trump raised for veterans? Crockett looked at Trump. 4 months, Mr. President. 4 months, and the money people donated to help veterans was sitting in the Trump Foundation, your personal charitable foundation, not distributed, not helping anyone. Trump's voice rose. We were vetting the organizations. You can't just give money to anyone. We had to be careful. You were careful for 4 months until a reporter started asking questions. Then suddenly, within days, checks started going out. She pulled up another document dated May 24, 2016. This is particularly interesting. Your personal donation, the $1 million you promised from your own pocket. She highlighted a date. You wrote that check on May 24, 2016, 4 months after the fundraiser. The same day, the exact same day that the Washington Post ran a story with the headline, Trump promised veterans $1 million, where is it? She let that sink in. You didn't give the money until you got caught not giving it. Your generous donation wasn't generosity, it was damage control. The audience had gone totally quiet. The easy applause from the opening was gone. A voice rose from the crowd, an older male with the slight rasp of someone who had seen too much. May I say something? Beyer looked uncertain, but the man was already standing. He was perhaps 70, wearing a faded army jacket with patches from the 101st Airborne. A wheelchair was parked beside his seat. My name is Harold Washington, Staff Sergeant, 101st Airborne Division, 2 tours in Vietnam, 3 Purple Hearts. Trump started to speak. Thank you for your service, Harold. We love the 101st. I'm not finished, sir. The words cut through the studio like a blade. Trump stopped instantly. I watched that fundraiser in 2016. I was in a VA hospital at the time, bladder cancer, Agent Orange, they think. And I remember lying in that bed watching you on TV thinking, finally someone in power actually gives a damn about us. His voice was steady, but there was old pain underneath, decades of it. I told my wife, I said, this Trump guy, he's different. He raised $6 million in one night. He's giving $1 million of his own money. He actually cares." He paused. "Was any of that real, Mr. President? Or was it just another show?" Trump leaned forward, his voice softening to campaign sympathy mode. "Harold, it was absolutely real. We gave millions to veteran groups, great organizations. The money went to heroes like you." "When?" The single word stopped Trump cold. "When did the money go to them? Because the Congresswoman just showed us it sat in your foundation for 4 months until a newspaper started asking questions." Trump opened his mouth, then closed it. Harold sat down slowly, the weight of 70 years pressing on him. "I just wanted to know if I was right about you, or if I was a fool." He didn't look at Trump again. Crockett let the silence hang for a long moment before continuing. "Mr. Washington asked a fair question. Let's see if we can answer it. Let's look at where the money actually went." She pulled up a document, a list of organizations and dollar amounts. Some legitimate veteran organizations did eventually receive funds. Fisher House, which provides housing for families of hospitalized veterans, received $115,000. Operation Homefront, which helps military families, received $100,000. These are good organizations doing important work. She paused, but not all the money went to organizations like these. A new list appeared on screen. $100,000 went to a foundation run by a business associate of Mr. Trump's. $50,000 went to an organization that had hosted events at Trump properties. $10,000 went to a group that had given Mr. Trump an award the previous year. She looked at the audience. The money people donated to help veterans was distributed in part, but based on who had been nice to Donald Trump. A woman stood in the front row, Marine dress uniform pins glinting on her lapel. She was maybe 50, with the posture of someone who had spent a career snapping to attention. "My name is Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, 12 years, United States Marine Corps. I run a small veterans housing nonprofit in Phoenix. We help homeless vets get off the streets, put roofs over their heads, get them back on their feet." Her voice was controlled, but barely. The anger underneath was molten. "We applied for funding from that fundraiser. We had documentation. We had a track record. We'd helped over 200 homeless veterans find housing in 3 years. We were exactly the kind of organization that money was supposed to help." She paused. "We got nothing, but a foundation run by your golf buddy got $100,000. She sat down, her hands shaking visibly. Crockett waited, then continued. "But it gets worse, because the Trump Foundation, the organization that received and distributed this money, was later investigated by the New York Attorney General." She pulled up an official document. The seal of New York State was clearly visible. December 2018, the Trump Foundation was ordered to dissolve, not voluntarily closed, ordered to shut down by a court of law. The Attorney General called it, and I'm quoting directly, "a shocking pattern of illegality." Trump's voice rose. "That was political persecution. The Attorney General was a Democrat. The court found that your foundation was used as, quote, little more than a checkbook for Mr. Trump's personal and business interests. Foundation money, money donated for charity, was used to pay legal settlements for your businesses, to buy items for your personal use, and to make political donations that nonprofits are explicitly prohibited from making." She pulled up specific items. $10,000 to purchase a 6-foot-tall portrait of yourself, which hung in one of your golf clubs. Gasps rose from the audience. $258,000 to settle lawsuits against your businesses. $25,000 in illegal political donations to Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi while her office was deciding whether to investigate Trump University. She set down the document. "And as a result, you are now banned from running a charity in New York State, banned for 10 years because you used charitable donations as a personal slush fund." She pulled up one more piece of evidence. "But I want to make sure everyone understands what this means. The Trump Foundation wasn't some small family charity. It received millions of dollars over the years, millions that were supposed to help people." A photograph appeared on screen. Trump at a ribbon-cutting ceremony holding an oversized check surrounded by children in wheelchairs. This was a 1996 event. You presented a check to a children's charity, smiled for the cameras, and got the good press. She pulled up the foundation's tax records. The check you're holding in that photo, it wasn't from your personal funds. It was from the Trump Foundation, money that other people had donated for charity. You just stood there and took credit for their generosity. Another photograph appeared, another ceremony, another oversized check. This pattern repeated for years. Other people donate to your foundation, you present the money to charities as if it came from you get the publicity, you get the applause, and you get to call yourself a philanthropist. She shook her head. It was a con, a decades-long con, and it took a newspaper investigation and a state attorney general to finally stop it. Trump's voice was defensive. Lots of wealthy people have charitable foundations. Lots of wealthy people don't get banned from running them because they stole from cancer kids and veterans. The words landed like hammer blows. An older man stood in the middle section. He was black, in his early 70s, wearing a Navy cap with USS Coral Sea embroidered across the front. My name is James Williams, Petty Officer First Class, United States Navy, 30 years of service, 3 deployments. His voice was like gravel worn smooth by decades. I donated to that fundraiser, $200. He paused. That was my disability check for the month. I figured other vets needed it more than me. There's always someone worse off, you know. He looked at Trump with a kind of look that went through a man. You used my disability check to pay off your lawsuits and to buy a painting of yourself. Trump started to respond. James, I would never. I've been scraping by on VA benefits for 20 years, Mr. President, counting pennies, making choices between medicine and groceries. His voice hardened. And you, a billionaire? You took my $200 and spent it on your golf club decorations. He sat down. His wife reached for his hand. Crockett let the moment breathe. 5 seconds, 10. Then quietly she said, Mr. President, you've stood in front of veteran audiences hundreds of times. You've talked about how much you love the military, how much you respect their sacrifice. She closed the blue folder. But I have one more thing to show you. Something you've never addressed publicly. Something about what you really think of the people who serve. She opened the red folder, the thick one. Let's talk about suckers and losers. Trump's reaction was immediate. I know what you're going to say, and it's a total lie. The Atlantic magazine made it up. Anonymous sources, fake news, journalists trying to destroy me. I never said those things about our soldiers. His voice echoed in the studio. Several audience members flinched. Crockett waited for the outburst to pass. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle. Let's start with something that's not in dispute, something that's on video, something everyone in this room can verify with their own eyes and ears. She pulled it up on the screen. The date stamp read July 18, 2015, a campaign event in Iowa. The subject was Senator John McCain, naval aviator shot down over Hanoi, prisoner of war for 5.5 years. The video played, and Trump's voice filled the studio. He's not a war hero. He was a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured. The clip ended. The silence that followed was total. Crockett spoke into it. Senator John McCain, ejected from his damaged aircraft over Hanoi in 1967, he broke both arms and a leg. He was pulled from a lake by an angry mob, beaten and bayoneted. He spent 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. He was tortured so severely that he couldn't raise his arms above his head for the rest of his life. She paused. When his captors learned that his father was a Navy admiral, they offered him early release. It would have been a propaganda victory for North Vietnam. He refused. The Code of Conduct says you don't accept special treatment. You don't leave before prisoners who've been there longer. So he stayed for 3 more years, being beaten, being starved, because that's what honor required. She looked at Trump. And you said he wasn't a hero because he got captured. Trump shifted at his podium. I have great respect for John McCain's service. I like people that weren't captured. Those are your exact words. On camera. What context makes that acceptable? No answer. A man stood in the audience. He was perhaps 55, wearing a suit, but there was something military in his bearing, the way he held himself, the way he didn't waste movement. My name is David Mitchell. My father was Captain Richard Mitchell, United States Air Force. He was shot down over North Vietnam in 1967. He spent 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton. 6 years. His voice was steady, but there was something terrible underneath. I was 9 years old when he came home. I barely recognized him. He weighed 110 pounds. He had scars on his back from being beaten. His shoulders were permanently dislocated from being hung from the ceiling. He looked directly at Trump. My father was a hero, Mr. President. Not because he got shot down, but because he never broke. For 6 years, he refused to give the enemy anything. He refused to make propaganda statements. He refused to betray his country or his fellow prisoners. His voice finally cracked. And you said men like him aren't heroes because they got captured. You said you liked people that weren't captured. He swallowed hard. He died in 2019. He saw you give that speech. He never talked about it, but I could see it in his eyes. The confusion, the hurt. A man who endured 6 years of torture and you made him feel ashamed. David sat down. His wife put her hand on his arm. He didn't seem to notice. Crockett allowed the silence to stretch. 20 seconds, 30. The only sound was someone crying softly in the back rows. Then she continued, "That was 2015. On camera. Undeniable. But what about behind closed doors? What about when you thought no one was listening?" She pulled up a magazine cover, The Atlantic, dated September 2020. According to 4 people with first-hand knowledge, during a 2018 trip to France to mark the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, you refused to visit the Aisne-Marne American Cemetery. 800 American soldiers are buried there, Marines who died at Belleau Wood. Trump's voice was loud. That's been debunked. The Secret Service said we couldn't go because of weather. The Secret Service issued a statement saying weather was not a factor in their security assessment. She continued reading. According to these sources, you called the buried Marines losers. You asked your staff, why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers. Lies, Trump shouted. You also reportedly said, why should I go? It's raining. My hair will get wet. Total fabrication. Crockett set down the magazine. You're right that the original sources were anonymous. Many people found that convenient to dismiss. She pulled out another document. But they are not anonymous anymore. The document on screen showed a transcript of an interview with a name at the top, General John F. Kelly, USMC, returnee. General John Kelly, 4-star Marine General, your White House Chief of Staff from 2017 to 2019. Gold Star father, his son Robert, was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. She began reading. When I pointed out graves of soldiers, the president asked if they were suckers. He could not understand why someone would give their life for their country. What was in it for them? He asked. Trump was shaking his head violently. Kelly is a liar. He's trying to sell books. He cannot fathom the concept of service above self. That's just beyond him. He's a disgruntled employee. I fired him. He called American war dead losers and suckers. I was there. I heard him. There is no other way to interpret what he said. Crockett looked up from the document. General Kelly's son is buried in Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery, the same cemetery where you asked what was in it for them about the other graves. She pulled out more documents, more names. General James Mattis, your Secretary of Defense, 44 years of service. He said you were the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people. General Mark Milley, your chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He called you fascist to the core and the most dangerous person to this country. General John Hyten, vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He warned that you might try to use nuclear weapons illegally. She set down the papers. These aren't Democrats, Mr. President. These aren't cable news pundits. These are 4-star generals, career military officers who dedicated their lives to this country, men who stood beside you in the Oval Office, in the Situation Room, at Arlington National Cemetery. Her voice hardened. And every single one of them says you are unfit to lead. Every single one says you despise the military you claim to love. A woman stood in the front row. She was perhaps 60, small and gray-haired, clutching something to her chest. It took a moment to recognize what it was, a folded American flag. My name is Patricia Reyes. My son was Corporal Daniel Reyes. He was killed in Afghanistan in 2012. He was 22 years old. The room went absolutely silent. When I heard what you said about soldiers being suckers and losers, I didn't believe it at first. I thought, no president would say that. Not about our children, not about the ones who didn't come home. She looked down at the flag in her hands. This flag was on my son's coffin. I've held it every day for 12 years. It's the last thing I touch before I go to sleep. It's the first thing I see when I wake up. It's all I have left of him. She looked at Trump, not with anger, but something worse, something more tired. Was my son a sucker, Mr. President? Was he a loser for dying to protect people like you? People who have never sacrificed anything for anyone? Trump's voice softened, reaching for sympathy. Ma'am, I would never. Your son was a hero. I have tremendous respect. Then why won't General Kelly stand next to you? The question landed like a bomb. He's a Gold Star father, too. His son is buried near mine. They died the same year in the same war for the same country. Why won't he support you? She waited. Because he was there, wasn't he? He heard what you said. He knows who you really are. She sat down, still holding the flag. Her shoulders shook once, then stilled. Crockett's voice was quiet when she spoke again. Mrs. Reyes asked why General Kelly won't support you. Let me read you his answer. She pulled up another interview transcript, October 2024. General Kelly gave an interview to the New York Times. Here's what he said. She read aloud. He is the most flawed person I have ever met in my life. The depths of his dishonesty is just astounding to me. The dishonesty, the transactional nature of every relationship, it's beyond my ability to understand. Another quote. A person who admires autocrats and murderous dictators, a person who has nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, our Constitution, and the rule of law. Another, God help us, what a president he would make, huh? She set down the paper. That's your own chief of staff, Mr. President. A Marine general, a Gold Star father, a man who buried his son in Arlington Cemetery, and he's begging Americans not to vote for you. She pulled up one more document. But maybe you'll say General Kelly is biased. Maybe you'll say he has an agenda. So let me show you something else, something physical, something that can't be spun. The screen showed a photograph, a cemetery in France, rows upon rows of white crosses stretching toward the horizon, green grass between them, gray sky above. Aisne-Marne American Cemetery, 2,289 American soldiers are buried here. Most of them died at Belleau Wood in 1918, Marines mostly. They stopped a German advance that could have reached Paris. They fought hand-to-hand in wheat fields that turned red with blood. She zoomed in on a section of the photograph. On November 10, 2018, you were scheduled to visit this cemetery for the 100th anniversary of the armistice. Every other world leader was there. Macron, Merkel, May. They all stood in the rain and honored the dead. Another photograph appeared. The other leaders, heads bowed, rain falling. You didn't go. Trump shifted. The Secret Service said The Secret Service said weather was not a factor in their security assessment. The Marine One helicopter couldn't fly, but ground transportation was available. You chose not to go. She let that sit. You stayed in your hotel room while the leaders of the free world stood in the rain to honor American soldiers who died saving Europe. And according to multiple sources who were with you, you said, why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers. The word hung in the air like poison gas. Losers. That's what you called them. Boys from Kansas and Ohio and Texas who crossed an ocean to fight in trenches full of mud and blood and mustard gas, who died in wheat fields they'd never seen before, thousands of miles from home. Losers. A woman in the middle section stood. He was perhaps 45, wearing a simple black dress, no jewelry except a small gold star pin on her lapel. My name is Jennifer Adams. I'm a Gold Star sister. My brother, Staff Sergeant Michael Adams, was killed in Fallujah in 2004. He was 24 years old. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. I wasn't going to speak tonight. I came here to listen, but I can't. She stopped, gathered herself. My brother volunteered after 9/11. He walked into a recruiter's office and signed up. He didn't have to. He had a scholarship to Ohio State. He could have stayed safe, stayed home, built a career. She looked at Trump. But he believed. He believed that service meant something, that some things were worth dying for, that when your country calls, you answer. Her voice hardened. He wasn't a sucker for believing that. He wasn't a loser for dying for it. He was a hero, a real one, not the kind you play on television. She sat down. Her husband reached for her hand. Another man stood, older, 70 at least, walking slowly, carefully, the way men walk when their bodies have been broken and rebuilt more times than they can count. My name is Robert Kowalski, Sergeant First Class, United States Army, Korea 1950 to 1953. The room seemed to straighten slightly, a Korean War veteran, one of the few left. I was at Chosin Reservoir, frozen Chosin, we called it, 30 below zero, Chinese everywhere. We walked out of that valley carrying our wounded and our dead, because we don't leave anyone behind. His voice was like old leather, cracked but unbreakable. I'm 93 years old, Mr. President. Most of the men I served with are gone now. Every year there are fewer of us. Every year we gather and remember, and the circle gets smaller. He pointed a gnarled finger at Trump. We didn't freeze in Korea so that 70 years later some draft-dodging rich boy could call us suckers. We didn't watch our friends die so you could skip a cemetery visit because of rain. He lowered his hand. I voted Republican since Eisenhower, but I didn't survive Chosin to vote for a man who spits on my brother's graves. He sat down. The woman next to him, his daughter perhaps, was crying silently. Crockett waited, let the testimonies accumulate like stones on a grave. A man in the back of the room stood. He was older, mid-70s perhaps, with close-cropped gray hair and the unmistakable bearing of career military. When he spoke, his voice was like bedrock. Sergeant Major Raymond Thompson, United States Marine Corps, retired, 2 tours in Vietnam, 2 in the Gulf. He moved slowly toward the center aisle, his footsteps the only sound in the room. 47 years ago, I held my best friend in my arms while he died on a trail outside Khe Sanh. His name was Marcus Jackson. He was 20 years old. He wanted to be a teacher. He never got the chance. He stopped walking and stood in the aisle like a statue. I voted Republican my entire life, voted for Nixon, voted for Reagan twice, voted for both Bushes, voted for you in 2016. He looked at Trump. I believed you when you said you loved veterans, when you said you'd take care of us, when you said no one respected the military more than you. A long pause. I was the sucker, Mr. President. The words fell like stones. The loser was anyone who believed a word you said. He started walking toward the exit, but at the end of the aisle he stopped and turned around. You asked what was in it for them, for Marcus, for all of them. I'll tell you what was in it. His voice dropped low. They believed in something bigger than themselves. They believed in this country. They believed that the flag actually meant something, that the words actually meant something, that the sacrifice actually meant something. He shook his head. You don't believe in anything except yourself. That's the difference between you and them. They were heroes. You're just a man who plays one on TV. He walked to the door, opened it. Then something extraordinary happened. Another veteran stood, removed his VFW cap, and started walking toward the same door. Then another, then 3 more. One by one, 6 veterans rose from their seats. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They simply removed their caps, held them over their hearts, and filed toward the exit. An older woman in a wheelchair, Marine insignia on her jacket, a folded flag in her lap, paused at the door. She was the last one. She turned her chair to face Trump. My husband is buried in Section 60, right near Robert Kelly, right near Daniel Reyes. Her voice was ice and fire. He volunteered for 3 tours because he believed in this country. He believed in sacrifice. He believed in honor. She held Trump's gaze. "You're no commander-in-chief of mine, sir." The door closed behind her. 6 empty chairs, 6 caps that wouldn't be put back on. 6 Americans who had seen combat, who had buried friends, who had given years of their lives, gone. The studio was silent except for the sound of crying. Crockett stood at her podium, folders closed, watching Trump. He was gripping his podium so hard his knuckles had gone white. His face had passed through red into something pale and sick. 10 seconds passed. 20. Crockett spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. Those men and women served this country with honor. They buried friends. They carried flag-draped coffins. They woke up screaming from nightmares you will never understand. She gathered her folders. "And you couldn't even visit their graves in France because you were worried about your hair." Pause. "That's not patriotism, Mr. President." Pause. "That's cowardice." Something in Trump snapped. "This is a setup." His voice cracked, rising toward hysteria. "This whole thing, you brought in fake veterans to attack me." Crockett didn't flinch. "Fake veterans? Those are Americans with service records, with discharge papers, with graves they visit every week. The generals are liars. Kelly is a liar. Mattis is woke. Milley is a traitor. They're all part of the deep state." He was pacing now, unable to stand still. "I've done more for the military than any president. I rebuilt the whole thing. The real soldiers love me, not these plants, these Democrat actors." A voice from the audience, one of the remaining veterans. "Mr. President, I have 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. Are you calling me an actor?" Trump spun toward the voice. "Not you, the others, the ones who left." Another voice. "I did 3 tours in Iraq. You saying I'm a plant?" And another. "My son is at Fort Bragg right now. Are you calling his father a liar?" Trump was surrounded by voices now, quiet voices, steady voices, the voices of people who had been shot at for a living and weren't impressed by a man in a suit. He turned on Crockett, pointed at her. His finger was shaking. You did this! You orchestrated this whole thing!" He was losing control. Everyone could see it. "You don't know anything about the military. You've never sacrificed anything. You're just a—" The word was there, right there, pressing against his teeth. "You're nothing but a DEI hire, an affirmative action." He stopped. The word hung in the air, unspoken but heard by everyone. The silence was absolute. Crockett's voice was soft, almost kind. "Finish your sentence, Mr. President." He stared at her. His mouth worked, but nothing came out. "Say what you really want to say. America is watching." 10 seconds. 20. "That's what I thought." She picked up her folders. "That's who you've always been. That's the word you use when you think no one important is listening. The word that was in your mouth just now that you almost couldn't stop yourself from saying." She looked at him with something that might have been pity. "But here's the thing about that word. It doesn't hurt me. It reveals you. And now 50 million people know exactly what kind of man wants to be commander-in-chief of their sons and daughters." Trump grabbed his microphone and ripped it off his lapel. "I'm done. This is disgusting. Fox News is dead to me. Dead." He stormed toward the stage exit, handlers scrambling to catch up. But the wireless mic was still transmitting. It caught his voice as he walked away. "Get me out of here. They ambushed me. Those weren't real veterans. Get me out." Crockett's voice carried across the studio, calm and clear. "Mr. President." He paused at the edge of the curtain. Some instinct made him turn. "Every one of those veterans served this country with honor. They bled for it. Some of their friends died for it." She held his gaze. "I didn't make you say any of that. I just gave you a stage and let you be yourself." Beat. I think America finally saw who that is. Trump disappeared behind the curtain. Crockett stood alone on the stage. The audience sat frozen. Baer looked like a man who just watched a car crash in slow motion. Crockett turned to the remaining audience members. I'm sorry for what you witnessed tonight. You came here to talk about veterans issues. Instead, you watched a man who claims to love you reveal what he actually thinks of your service. She paused. But maybe that was the most important veterans issue of all, knowing who actually has your back and who's just using you for applause. She set her folders on the podium. Does anyone have questions? 40 hands went up. The broadcast officially ended at 10:52 p.m. Eastern, 38 minutes ahead of schedule. By 11:08 p.m., social media had already rendered its verdict. Hashtag Veterans Walkout hit #1 worldwide. Within 12 minutes, the clip of Sergeant Major Thompson saying, "I was the sucker," crossed 20 million views before midnight. By morning, it would be 70 million. The clip of Trump's almost word, that terrible pause, the way his mouth formed something he couldn't quite say, became the subject of frame-by-frame analysis. Everyone knew, no one needed it spelled out. Had he almost said it, trended at #2. Suckers and losers, dormant since the original 2020 CCO story, surged back to #3. Cable news went into overdrive. CNN split its screen between the walkout footage and a running tally of veteran reactions flooding social media. MSNBC ran a special hour-long broadcast that consisted almost entirely of veterans calling in to share their responses. Even Fox News, usually Trump's safe harbor, seemed shell-shocked. The late-night hosts who happened to be taping scrambled to rewrite their monologues. Trump's Truth Social erupted with the fury of a man who had been publicly unmade. 11:14 p.m. Complete setup. Fox News is finished. Worse than CNN. 11:31 p.m. The veterans were actors paid by Democrats. I demand an investigation. 11:47 p.m. Say, General Kelly is a liar and a loser. I fired him because he was incompetent. 12:09 a.m. I love our military more than anyone. Everyone knows that. Fake news. 12:34 a.m. Going to bed now. Total victory tonight despite the ambush. Everyone is saying I won. He posted 37 more times before dawn, each one more unhinged than the last, none of them addressing the documents, none of them explaining the timeline, none of them answering Patricia Reyes's question. By 6 a.m., his campaign had issued 3 different statements, each contradicting the others. The first called the event a coordinated Democrat attack. The second claimed Trump had left voluntarily to protest unfair treatment. The third attempted to pivot to economic issues entirely, as if the previous 5 hours hadn't happened. None of them worked. The morning shows were unanimous in a way morning shows rarely are. CNN ran the walkout footage on a loop with the chyron, 6 veterans walk out on Trump. MSNBC's Joe Scarborough opened his show by playing Sergeant Major Thompson's full statement, then sat in silence for a full minute before speaking. I served in Congress with members of both parties who were veterans. I've never seen anything like that, and I hope I never do again. ABC's Good Morning America led with Patricia Reyes, the Gold Star mother who had agreed to a brief interview. She sat in the studio, still holding her son's flag, and spoke quietly about what it felt like to ask the President of the United States if her child was a sucker. I didn't plan to say anything, she told the interviewer. I needed to know. I needed him to look at me and tell me the truth. Did he? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. No, he couldn't even do that. Even Fox and Friends seemed shell-shocked. They played a brief, heavily edited clip and pivoted quickly to other topics. Their comment section, usually fiercely pro-Trump, was flooded with veterans sharing their own reactions. The moderation team worked overtime to delete the most critical posts, but they couldn't keep up. The poll numbers moved faster than any analyst had seen in modern politics. Within 72 hours, Trump's support among veterans dropped 14 points. Among military families, 11 points. Among voters over 65, 9 points. Among white men without college degrees, usually his strongest demographic, he dropped 6 points. 3 Republican senators with military backgrounds, all 3 had served in combat, withdrew their endorsements within a week. Their statements were brief and remarkably similar. Our veterans deserve better. A fourth senator who hadn't served but whose father had been killed in Vietnam issued a longer statement. I watched that broadcast with my mother. She cried for 2 hours. I cannot in good conscience support a man who caused her that pain. Bashidisats. The VFW and American Legion, organizations that had carefully avoided partisan statements for decades, issued a joint statement. We are deeply troubled by comments attributed to the former president regarding fallen service members. Our heroes deserve respect, not ridicule. Within a week, that statement had been read aloud at over 3,000 VFW posts and American Legion halls across the country. General Kelly gave his first on-camera interview since the incident, 3 days after the broadcast. He sat with a single reporter for 45 minutes. His voice never wavered. I've tried to stay out of politics. I've tried to let others speak. But when I saw those veterans walk out, when I saw Patricia Reyes holding her son's flag, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. He looked directly into the camera. Everything she showed was true. Everything I've said about him is true, and every veteran in America deserves to know it. Yeah. At a rally in Georgia 2 weeks later, Trump tried to address what had happened. That thing on Fox News, total setup, complete and total ambush. They brought in Democrat activists dressed as veterans. It was disgusting, frankly. But you know what? I walked out because that's what strong people do. They don't sit there and take abuse. They walk away. The crowd cheered, but reporters noted the applause seemed thinner than usual. The arena was barely 2/3 full, and when protesters outside held signs reading, "Finish your sentence," several Trump supporters stopped to read them, their faces troubled. One image went viral, an elderly white man in a MAGA hat standing next to a young woman holding a sign that read, "My grandfather died in Korea. Was he a sucker too?" The man was crying. Jasmine Crockett returned to Congress 3 days after the broadcast. She did not give interviews. She did not appear on talk shows. She did not post victory laps on social media or write op-eds explaining her strategy. When a reporter caught her in a Capitol hallway and asked for comment, she said only, "I'm a public servant. I have work to do." "Do you feel like you won?" Crockett paused. This was never about winning, and it was never about me. It was about the truth. The American people, especially our veterans, deserve to know who this man really is. Now they know. What they do with that information is up to them. What about the moment when he I know what word was in his mouth. Her voice was quiet but firm. Every black person watching knew, and now every white person watching knows too. Maybe that matters. Maybe now we can have an honest conversation about who's asking for their votes. She started to walk away, then turned back. He called me low IQ. He called me DEI. He wanted to call me something else. The only reason he didn't was because the cameras were on. She straightened her jacket. But here's the thing about that word. It doesn't hurt me. It just shows everyone who he is. And I think our veterans, the real ones, the ones who served, the ones who sacrificed, I think they deserve to see it. Nay. She walked into her office and closed the door. The nameplate read Jasmine Crockett, DTX. Someone had taped a small edition underneath, a sticky note handwritten, "She who brings receipts." Inside her office, Crockett sat at her desk. The walls were covered with framed photographs, constituents, community events, her swearing-in ceremony. One new addition, a letter handwritten on VFW stationery from Raymond Thompson. "Congresswoman, I've never written to a politician before, never saw the point, but I wanted you to know something. You didn't just show us documents that night. You gave us permission to believe what we'd been trying not to see. You gave us permission to be angry about it. I spent years defending that man, making excuses for him, telling myself the reports must be wrong, the generals must be lying, the media must be twisting things, because the alternative, that I'd given my loyalty to someone who despised my service, was too painful to accept. You made us accept it, and that was a gift, even if it didn't feel like one. My wife says I've been different since that night. Lighter, she says. Like something that was pressing on me finally lifted. I think she's right. The truth hurts, but lies hurt more in the long run. Thank you for doing what our own side couldn't do. Thank you for giving us the truth. Semper Fi Raymond Thompson, Sergeant Major, USMC, Retarci. Crockett read the letter again, as she did most mornings. Then she sat it down and picked up a briefing book. There was a hearing this afternoon, Veterans Healthcare Funding. Another battle, smaller than the one on Fox News, but just as important. She opened to the first page and started reading. The work never stopped. The fights never ended. But sometimes, if you were lucky, you got to see a small piece of justice done. That would have to be enough for now. And somewhere in Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery, where Robert Kelly and Daniel Reyes and thousands of other heroes sleep beneath white stones, the wind rustled through the trees. The dead don't speak, but sometimes if you listen carefully, you can hear what they would have said. Thank you for telling the truth about us. Thank you for not letting him get away with it. Thank you for remembering what we gave. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do. Remember, bear witness, tell the truth, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. 6 veterans walked out that night. Not because anyone told them to, not because it was staged or planned, but because for the first time they heard the truth and they couldn't sit there anymore. They'd given years of their lives to this country. Some gave pieces of their bodies. Some gave friends who never came home. And they finally understood. He never saw them as heroes. He saw them as suckers. If this story moved you, share it with a veteran in your life. Share it with someone who needs to know the truth, and tell us, what would you have said to him that night?